Every gardener knows that transforming a patch of land into a place filled with colourful flowers and delicious vegetables is an endless and time-consuming task. And any garden that hasn't been looked after for even a few months will quickly start to become overgrown. But what happens when nobody has been looking after a garden for decades and nature has completely taken over? Today, the Lost Gardens of Heligan is one of the most famous garden attractions in the UK. Situated on the south coast of Cornwall, the gardens have around 300,000 visitors every year. Over 5 million people from around the world have already visited this beautiful place. So it's hard to imagine that just 25 years ago, these gardens were forgotten and completely unrecognizable. There have been gardens here since the first Heligan Manor was built in the 13th century. There's nothing left of that original building today, but over the next 500 years, the house was rebuilt by generations of the Tremaine family, who owned the estate. From the end of the 18th century, Heligan's gardens started to become famous for their growing collection of exotic plants. Remarkably, species from China, Japan, India, New Zealand and Australia all grew well in the mild climate of the southwest of England. But Heligan relied on many workers from the local community to look after the enormous 1,000-acre estate, with its beautiful gardens and working farm. And when the First World War started, 13 of the men suddenly left to fight. Tragically, only 4 returned. After the war, the Tremaine family left, and the famous gardens started to be forgotten. When the house became apartments in the 1970s, the beautiful gardens were completely abandoned, and they were lost to nature. The story of how the gardens were rediscovered and slowly restored is a remarkable one. And it's a story about the dedication of a few individuals and the hard work of a whole community who came together to bring something beautiful back to life. The dream of restoring the lost gardens of Heligan was first born in early 1990. Tim Smith, a former record producer, and John Willis, a descendant of the Tremaine family, visited the abandoned gardens looking for a place to start a small farm. Candy Smith, who was married to Tim and has worked here since the very start, tells us more.
I came to Heligan in February 1990, which is now more than a quarter of a century ago. Our children were young. We'd only recently moved to Cornwall. And he came here with the then owner, John Willis, who had inherited the grounds from his great-uncle. My first impressions of this place were literally the day after Tim came here, and it is unbelievable that we're actually standing in the same place now. The whole of the garden area was completely overgrown. I think the biggest challenge was actually persuading other people that the restoration could be undertaken.
Tim knew that he could not transform the lost gardens single-handedly. Luckily, he knew a local builder, John Nelson, who was ready for a challenge.
He was also someone who wasn't afraid of hard work and adventure, and he signed up with Tim as an informal partnership to just making this happen.
Initially, the cost of clearing such a huge area of overgrown land was the biggest problem. It was very expensive to employ people to work on the land.
So John decided that he would clear an acre of ground and see how long it took him, and then work on multiplying that. So he came in single-handed and started clearance.
News quickly spread about what was happening at Heligan, and volunteers from the local community started offering to help. And some local people offered more than just their time and energy.
There were hire companies with the most amazingly useful tools who said, well, look, you can borrow chainsaws for a week, or you can have a digger for a week. So there were a lot of people who were informally involved very early on, and it became a real passion for them.
In April 1992, Heligan opened to the public for the first time.
Right now we're celebrating 25 years since we opened to the public. But the fascination with Heligan is that we opened to the public when the restoration was only in its very early days. So visitors, early visitors, came and saw this place, in some places as we found it. So they have shared the adventure.
The restoration of Heligan has continued to this day, and the staff haven't finished their work yet. There have been many setbacks along the way, and there's always a new challenge. Today, the garden has around 20 full-time employees and many more seasonal and volunteer staff. And some of these people, like Candy, have worked at the gardens since the very start and have watched its transformation. In 1993, a boardwalk was built through the area known as the jungle, so visitors could see all the amazing exotic plants that have been growing here since the late 18th century. And since 2014, brave visitors have been able to cross the jungle on the 30-metre-long rope bridge. At the Wildlife Hide, visitors can see beautiful local birds and learn more about the management of the natural environment. Conservation, biodiversity and wildlife management have always been important considerations at Heligan. By the year 2000, the vegetable garden was producing crops again, and the farm was thriving. Many of the fruit and vegetables grown here are heritage breeds, old varieties that aren't used much in farming anymore. Today, most of the food served in the Heligan restaurant has been grown in the garden or on the farm. The planting is still done by hand, using traditional tools. Gardeners have been doing these jobs the same way since the earliest days of the estate. And recently, Heligan started offering apprenticeships to young people who want to work in the gardens and on the farm.
We're still trying to reintroduce the old ways. And for me personally, I think the great attraction is to see a working garden, to see staff in the garden every day going about their business, and our visitors witnessing and being able to talk to people who do physical work and skilled work today. We also have heritage breeds of cattle and pigs and cows and chickens, and getting up close to those animals is a really awesome experience. It's amazing to watch people meet their first cow or their first baby lamb, or watch a lamb being born.
The restoration of the lost gardens of Heligan is a heartening story of a community coming together to bring something beautiful back to life. And these gardens will never be forgotten again.